Hello, everyone. Welcome to Architecting. I'm really excited today to have as my guest Doug King. Doug is a good friend of mine. He's a fellow healthcare architect. We have been up to mischief at many of a conference and many projects, but he is the vice president emeritus at Project Management Advisors, and he also has his own healthcare consulting company. So, welcome, Doug.
Thank you so much, Angela. This is a pleasure to be here. So, yeah.
I know we've been kind of hinting around at doing this for a couple years now, so it's great to finally have you on the show.
Well, well, we're thrilled, and I'm thrilled, that's for sure. Yeah. So, looking forward to it.
So, one of the things that I think you really bring a great perspective on is career path and mentoring. You have your own really interesting story, but you've also been very generous with your time, very willing to help others. So I wanted to explore a little bit with you where you have kind of played around with taking risks and really having audacity and given yourself agency versus waiting for other people to offer you an opportunity.
Well, actually, becoming an architect took a certain amount of risk. I was the first child in our family generation to go to college. And so, at the urging of my mother, I didn't, underestimate my abilities. Instead, she said, "Well, why don't you go off to a university?" And I went off to the University of Detroit in Detroit in the mid 70s, growing up in a very small town, living on a dirt road that was called King Court, named after my father, who built all the homes in the area. And so I came from a real rural area, went to Detroit, went to college. I wanted to make sure it sunk in, and actually took a while. And I did a master's thesis that took 2 years. And myself and one other individual decided to write a play as the way to communicate our design. Right. And so we tried conventional ways of talking through it, and there was like so much noise. We said, how about if we write a play? And so we didn't tell anybody except for one professor and a couple of other students who helped us with the lighting and sound. And so we did this play about these two space travelers traveling around to different planets to basically move their civilization to, which was in a sense a design critique, and it went over very well. And I was very surprised. My spouse at the time was mortified about the idea. And others were very much taken back. They didn't realize what they were about to witness. And so that taught me that there was talent there. I had some talent, and it taught me that I should trust instincts. And then shortly after that, well, not shortly, about 2 or 3 years later, I got on a very large project working for a very large architecture firm that did healthcare. And our lead designer was incapacitated every day. He would have long lunches, shall we say. And so myself and another guy said, well, if this fairly large hospital project at that time was maybe 60 or 80 million, now it'd be like 200 million, oddly enough, in Cincinnati, it's going to get done. We're going to do it. So that's what we did. And then my career has progressed from that, to be able to identify opportunities where I can do something maybe a little different than other people would. So I think learning to trust my instincts and understand that the opportunity may be presented, for reasons other than I may not even realize. So big lessons.
Yeah, and I think that not doubting your ability, being willing to try something new and say, let's see where this takes us, that's a really important lesson because I know a lot of people would say, I could never do that, or who am I to do that?
Oh yeah, that's a common, you hear that frequently, or I do anyway, when I talk to people about, hey, how about this bigger idea? And so the idea of being able to adapt and change and have trust in that ability is something I learned probably in my mid to late 20s. I began to really trust sort of this almost sixth sense, of taking risk, and also understanding that if things were starting to, go differently, stop and make the adjustment, talk to others. And so I've actually used that not just in our work, I use that in my life, the ability to do things a little different than others may normally do. The fact that I just say got remarried, at an older age with someone from another country is certainly, some people would say, oh, I never could do that. Well, it happens, and took it a step at a time. Made the adjust. That one definitely required some adjustments.
I'm sure. Well, I mean, I always like to joke that it's funny that my official work title is medical planner because I'm the worst planner. I don't like to make plans. I like to kind of be in the moment and trust my intuition and sort of feel into situations and make those on the fly decisions. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on when you've done that, how do you know that you're going the right direction versus
Mhm.
maybe I should try something different because this isn't working?
Well, there's been aha moments in my career. The aha moment when I discovered I was really pretty good at regulatory and code stuff was a big moment. Another one that occurred was when I got on a very long project, the Feinberg-Alder project in Northwestern. I was on for 8 years. We used the snow card system that was popularized with brainstorming, etc. And I discovered that technique was very akin to how I like to lead teams. It was inclusive, it was spontaneous, it was visual, and we could get people engaged on a consensus basis. And I like that because then I secretly wanted to become a psychologist. When I was about 10 years out of college, I actually took classes to become a counselor. And the most valuable class I took was a class on family therapy, okay, and family dynamics. And it was valuable to me because later on I discovered I was using those techniques in my consultant meetings
I
and
bet.
using them
I bet.
I mean, in any group meeting, the rules that apply to groups in general are pretty much uniform. And so that kind of fit my style. And I really like doing it. Actually, I gotta confess, I do not like the online version of the moving the little boxes. I like the spontaneity of live action. So, those are the kind of things that spurred excitement for me. It's the idea that be able to create that energy with people. And then you can also then adapt as a team. So you're not introducing an idea sort of out of the blue necessarily.
Yeah, I think that ability to read the room and make
Yes.
those little adjustments is such a powerful part of what makes design successful because you really have understood the pain points and you really are responding to not just what people say, but how they're really reacting because people say what we
Yeah,
want to hear way too much of the time.
right. And in a group situation, I mean, I like you, I mean, I can do planning, I can do design, but what I really get excited about is moving people in a common direction. And in my life, I've done a lot of sports activities. So I've been in the sort of manager or coach role. And so I'm in a situation where, frankly, shot or something, they're gonna trust their judgments and move forward. And you want to keep people to be confident and excited. So, that I try to find ways to get that into the conversation.
Yeah, that's, I think, the most exciting part, right? When you can get people to let down the performance of being who they think they're supposed to be and to be really honest about what works, what doesn't work, and to be more willing to entertain new ideas.
Yeah, and for me also, I was working on a large project where if we, if things went south or we had issues, it would be big issues because it was a really big, there's a big amount of money at stake. And so using things like snow cards, I would actually visually show the project things not getting done. It manifested in that, and people would see the implications without having to be told what they were if things didn't, if we didn't like focus on a particular area as a team. And being able to physically manifest the group learning experience is really great for me anyway. I really enjoy teaching. I enjoy the education side to not just, well, the profession, the mentorship, but also actually academia. So, yeah,
the, that spirit of exploration and willingness to break from the status quo is also kind of reflected in your career path. So, you said you started out in being a code expert, but then you moved into marketing and you really started to work with the power of storytelling. Then you moved into research and even inventing products and even became an expert in urban hospitals. And a
yeah,
lot of people would be like, how do you do all that? And what I love about your story, and I'd love to unpack more with you,
yeah,
is that you didn't let the liability of expertise get in your way. You said, if I'm interested in something or something seems like a good direction to explore, I'm just going to learn about it and I'm going to do it. And just by being brave enough to do it and talk about it and put it out there, suddenly that makes you an expert because no one else will do it.
right. And an important thing I learned actually through early teaching, and I was a graduate assistant for several years in college. I learned this was that if I have to teach something to somebody, it requires me to learn it. And if I'm, and so the idea of being on a stage talking about artificial intelligent robotics, in a situation which I've been in the last couple of years, requires me to do some research and some reading, teach it to people so that I can understand the kind of questions and issues that come up. In terms of that happening in my career, a couple of key moments were on the code side, it was basically being presented the opportunity to learn that discipline. I did, I did 5 projects in a row where I was a short straw to do the code analysis, and it became a wonderful way to learn and to apply that learning and to see the repetition. And then I was able to take it from a code book into understanding that the regulatory standards actually are negotiable. And I love the idea of something like that where it took on a life of its own. A couple things I did. One, I learned to graphically display what the code wanted. And this was sort of about the time we were starting to see the handbooks come out. And then also then I learned that you could negotiate these things. That's when the fun began. Because I secretly really also wanted to be a lawyer at one point, and that's the closest thing you get to being a lawyer, I think, in architecture. And then later on, as you said, as you mentioned, I got thrown into situations where I basically had a choice. I got involved in some mobile architecture. I have a pretty significant mobile architecture background. In college, I liked a group called Archigram, which was like all about mobile architecture. But in real life, I've had a chance to design a couple of mobile hospitals for the Middle East, and also design a 3,000 bed facility for COVID, which we had to use basically found parts. Working in conjunction with others, the contractors and others, we put together literally found parts to create these 3,000 cubicles for patients. And so, and then most recently, the high rise healthcare notion that sort of grew out of working on large projects, and the spark for that was when the president's office at Northwestern Medicine called me up and said, "Is the Lurie Children's Hospital the tallest hospital in the world?" And I did a little bit of research with the Council on Tall Buildings, discovered no, it's not, but it is the tallest children's hospital at the time. And then I, through that research, discovered I had worked on several of the larger hospitals. And I said, well, that might make me an expert. So I did what most early 50-year-olds do. I wrote a blog. Okay, and the blog went semi-viral. Okay, I began an article which began a conference, not just a workshop, but a conference. And that begat additional articles and a lot more public presentations because people grabbed onto the idea. And that was, for me, that's exciting when I'm around people who are interested and excited about the idea.
Yeah, I've heard it said that architects are conveners, and I think you do that so well because you're following your own interests, your own passions, but you're also understanding what my freshman year English teacher in high school used to say, knowledge is knowing where to find it. That by going out and finding people who have a certain background or point of view or field of knowledge and pulling everybody together and collaborating, you're able to create things that no one ever thought of before.
Yeah, and what you just identified is symbolic, or actually uh, manifested both in the Feinberg-Alder Pavilion, which was, a well-known hospital that had plenty of opportunities for invention, being the very first large hospital with all single patient rooms and all the manifestations from that, and then following on with literally the same team doing the Prentice Women's Hospital, which was a cutting edge women's facility across all ages. And we were able to, as you say, invent things and create ideas and create systems that are used even today in other larger projects. I'm actually particularly proud of the fact that literally there's ancestral connections back to those original projects in terms of how people are doing things and approaching problem solving.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think it's hard to realize sometimes that you were one of the forefathers of what we think of and take for granted in healthcare today because you were willing to question the way healthcare was happening at the time.
Right. And I was joined with others, who obviously this was a team effort and we had an owner that was very open-minded as well. That was key, to find an owner who was willing to also take that risk and to share the exploration and give us the space and the time. And I knew about a year in on an 8-year project that this was a special event. This was going to be like a career opportunity, or two, actually, it turned out. And I said, I'm going to work as hard as I can and as focused as I can on this because I never want to look back and say, I shortchanged myself with this opportunity. That this opportunity was so amazing. And I'm sure many people, or I would say people get that opportunity in their career to do things like that. And identifying it and running with it, full steam ahead is, I think, important.
Yeah.
Important. Yeah.
Would you say that that's really what it was? Because there are people who would say, oh, he was just lucky. I never get clients like that. I never get projects like that. What would you say to them?
I would say that maybe the earlier ones were somewhat, I wouldn't use the term lucky. Maybe they were, yeah, okay, we'll say lucky. Uh, um, but you begin to develop that spirit with other owners. I mean, I began to apply that kind of thinking, both when I started doing the mobile architecture, because I was working in the Middle East and finding owners. In that case, there were several owners, and this was the military, actually, with a couple of countries that were open to ideas. One was they challenged us to do a hospital that could be built and set up in a day, in literally a war zone. And then later on, I had my boss at the time, the founder of VOA, and I opened up the market in the Hispanic community here in Chicago. We did a master plan for a town that had some pretty amazing features within it that we understood, or I was able to understand and learn about the cultural aspects combined with what was needed commercially within the Chicago area. And the owner was open-minded to that. I mean, the owner, they didn't, they were looking for ideas, and they were looking for direction. And so, I mean, I think the worst thing we could get is an owner who has definitely got the problem solved from day one. That's great is to have somebody who is available that says, I'm open to ideas. I'm open to ideas here. So, yeah.
And I think also what you're saying, though, is that there's things you can suggest and introduce, and they might not have asked for it because they didn't know they needed it.
Right. Well, there's a whole process, and I've used this on other projects. It's timeless process. We didn't invent it. I didn't invent it. And that's the idea that the first meeting or two you have, you introduce the idea, you come up with a criteria that looks apparent from the beginning. And the secret sauce is when you develop the options. That's the second part. You develop approaches that could go in several directions. And because that then becomes the fodder for the conversation about here's what the opportunity is. And many times, as you know, it's not those three or whatever number of options you have. It might be a mixture of things. And that actually gives you license and opens the door for ingenuity. And then of course at that end people get excited and can move in a direction of consensus as to where, and they have a background as to why we got there. And I think the telling point on that, and you I'm sure experience this, is when the owners actually dying to tell people about it. They just can't wait to share what they're doing.
Yeah, that's the best marketing is when they tell the
Oh yeah.
story for you, right?
Absolutely. And that's tremendous because it is, just a testimony in a way to, who the process that was used. And I use that again. What I do here, one of my mentors, a guy named Rebel Roberts, who was the president of VOA, he modeled, we talk about mentorship, modeled some of these approaches, and I was able to apply some of it, many of it, in my own life, with my kids, with family, with the activities that I was involved in. And I found that there's some timelessness in how we approach, and I hate to use the word solve problems, but engage them and create options, what people can do. Again, to that notion of adaptability. He modeled that within the work environment, but I was able to take it not only in the work environment, but carry it into areas of my life. So that's kind of exciting, actually.
Yeah, and your flair for telling stories is kind of a common thread that runs through all this because to tell a story, you need to do a few things. You need to have the hook, the plot, but
Right.
you also need to know who your audience is and be able to tell the story that they can understand and relate to.
Oh, absolutely. I like that you mentioned that last part because I've been on the notion of high-rise healthcare or health facilities. I've now expanded it beyond just a pure technical discussion, which I'm actually giving one coming up where they want it to be about as technical as you could possibly make it. I gave one at the capstone celebration at a university in their healthcare class, and that one was really about how you can design your career. And one option is to look at larger projects as a career move. And then I've also done them where it's been, more of a planning or what's the drivers for this happening in an urban design setting. So you're right, your audience is very important as you formulate stories. And I've always been remember in the back of my mind that people are more likely to remember stories than to remember facts and figures and that kind of thing. And I tried to uh, adopt that in the things that I do is make it interesting. Make it interesting, make it memorable in some way. So, yeah.
So that has really carried through, and it's let you explore a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. Now you're even doing forensic architecture. But as you look back over your career path, what would you say the lessons learned from both the things you did do and the things you didn't do?
Well, I think the things I didn't do, there's an in between there I'd like to just address for a second, and that is the things I did a little later than I should have. For example, the whole notion of engaging and I'm going to use the word business development, but more things like getting clients together and doing like focus groups or having conversations with different clients and then writing articles or thought pieces. These were things that were suggested to me probably 7 to 10 years before they sunk in, and I actually did them. And I mean, I was growing towards those. They were seeds that were planted, and I would do it in small ways. But at some point, I did a full dive and said, okay, I'm now going to identify as a writer, or I'm going to identify as a thought leader or a storyteller. And instead of just, okay, I'm an architect that sees maybe a little bit of a story here in what I'm doing. It's a change of mindset to, I got there's a lesson here that can be portrayed. And so that has actually been a force feeding for me and a exciting, particularly later in my career, it generates energy for me. The idea that I can continue to learn, not just learn new things, but have new ideas to share with other people. For example, went from high-rise healthcare to emergency response planning because that actually was part of the large hospital urban design challenge I discovered intelligent building systems. Okay, a couple of years ago, I've watched this evolve from people looking at how to moderate their facilities to how can we create a more smarter setting, a setting that anticipates what people who are there, maybe as patients or providers want. And then that led to actually getting an opportunity to work on a project where AI and robotics was a centerpiece. We did a project to work with Stantec on a large hospital in Mississauga outside of Toronto, which actually is going to be one of the largest hospitals in North America. But everything in the hospital is being moved through the use of autonomous vehicles, autonomous vehicle systems and chutes, pneumatic tubes, etc. So there's not sneaker power anymore. And that then brings up the whole notion of having to coordinate all this and the implications on systems. And what's great about this project is they're carrying it to the nth degree, which allows us to study and understand what that all means. Because some people only grab pieces of it. And so for me, it becomes new fodder, each of these steps, for ideas that can be shared.
I love that. And it's this constant up-leveling and embracing the new and the possible. So how do you know when you're ready to do that and maybe walk away from something else and get uncomfortable as you embark on that new beginning?
Yeah, I the way, early on, I would say 3 or 4 feeble attempts at thought leadership. I picked topics that were either too narrow or too esoteric or didn't really know how to package it for a wider audience. But that's part of the learning. Part of the learning is putting together ideas, testing them out, seeing what happens, and then occasionally, or not occasionally, in my case, I struck on a couple of them that told me, okay, these are the characteristics of things that people get interested in, capture the imagination. Like the high rise thing was a big, I mean, I did a blog on that and it went viral. It was picked up by the AIA and Engineering News Record and everybody else. It was entitled, "Are We Ready for High Rise Hospitals?" Well, of course we were ready. We already had like 20 of them built in the world. And so, but it showed me that how to capture people's attention. And then later on with the emergency management stuff and the whole story of McCormick and its kinships, there's a number of these. There's a story there that's incredible. And when people look at it, they go, well, it was hardly ever used. Well, what I tell people is, every single day we were looking at the chart every morning. Allison Arwadi, the head of public health in Chicago, would talk about what the new numbers were. And there was a curve that was going up. And we were trying to predict what that curve was going to be on April 28th, 2020. And I remember every day, starting probably in the early March to that date, every day, it was mortifying, quite frankly. And so that's part of the story. The story of that project, it's interesting. We show 3,000 cubicles, or I think we built 2,250 when they sort of said, stop, that's enough. And so you get into the feelings part. What's the feeling that's being evoked from this experience? And the same thing with the AI and robotics. It's interesting because I present with another individual who is extremely expert in this subject, and I watch the audience when he goes from talking about these autonomous, like vehicle-looking things or other things that are, sort of neutral-looking, and he suddenly shows a humanoid robot.
Mm.
And the looks on people's faces, I wish I could snap pictures because it suddenly hits people. And I personally think it might be a hard sell for humanoid robots other than maybe in like the CSS department or something, because it's just too close to real,
Mhm.
and it's unbelievable what can be accomplished. But watching and getting people's attention as to why this movement is important for us in the industry. People focus a little bit on the lost jobs. Well, we have countered that with a series of statistic charts showing that that's inevitable because of the decline in birth rate, and a few other things, age gaps. And so this is actually going to keep us in the status quo in terms of service. So yeah, you're understanding the audience, you're engaging them in an area that is their fears, or not their fears, but their concerns, and that gets them excited.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing too is that you're probably doing twice as many things that don't stick.
Yes, that's very observant and I say that because I can't tell you how much effort, well, personally how much effort goes into putting together something like, a presentation or a series of presentations. And my cohort in this, my co-presenter, co-SME, we have graduated from the linear presentation with 68 to 85 slides to we now have entered the world of the workshop. The workshop where literally we walk in there with a couple of scenarios and we see what happens. And have trust that there'll be a guidance towards a learning experience that'll have lasting value because of that. And frankly, I've been mentored on that, not necessarily with specific people, but by watching other people who have done those types of events at large conferences and seeing how we study, my cohort and I, we study these presentations, and approaches now, and learn from them. I feel like I tell him, I say, I feel sometimes like we're rock stars in the late 60s watching the newest bands coming out and stealing we should set the guitar on fire next time or something.
But that is the secret, right? Instead of
Yeah.
being threatened by the new, looking at how can you integrate that? How can you evolve? How can you
Right.
change?
Right. And that's some of the fun actually, because learning the material is great. Conveying the material in a way people can learn, certainly great and valuable, but also making it engaging and making it creating it in a way that it becomes something they could take away and remember. I go back to architecture school. We did a project in second year of architecture school at the University of Detroit, where we basically started out with a cube. And it was called the Cube Project. And from that cube, we had different aspects that we could develop ideas and stories from. And I still learn from that project, and there are several others like that. I still learn from that now when I see buildings or I see other things that are manifesting or have ideas on them that I go, oh yeah, we studied that notion, of when we were doing this project. And so it was a framework for constant learning.
I mean, you're a smart guy and you clearly have a love of learning. You enjoy seeing new things. You're not afraid to question things or to move on from
Yeah.
traditions. And you've also kind of translated that love of learning to helping others in their careers. And before we wrap up, I wanted to get your thoughts because I know you have mentored many people throughout your career, and some have been within the firms you've worked for, others have been within the industry. But how do you help other people have the same growth mindset that you do? Versus a lot of times people get stuck or they let fear get in their way and they talk themselves out of things and even have secondary gains of what they get by not doing that thing they say they want to do.
Right. Um, and I've been in the position of teaching, mentoring, coaching pretty much my entire life. I would say it probably started at 12 or 13, little league or basketball or whatever sports. Um, People, kids in the neighborhood. I took on again that idea that learning something and conveying it to others is a way of getting better at something. And I've been fortunate to have people in my life, in this case with my parents and grandparents, who gave me information or ability to find information to then be able to convey it or teach it. And then since then, I've made that connection between opportunity to learn things and opportunity to teach to reinforce that. And teaching is not just doing a class, which I've done my share of, but also, like you say, in the mentorship realm, is having that honest sort of one-to-one conversation with people on aspects of their life or aspects of their career. And if we focus on career here, my father or my well stream, I guess, of well that I draw from is really from the perspective of 40 some years. I can say, well, back here in the late 70s, I thought this and this is what happened. They invented AutoCAD. That's what they did. And then they invented Revit, and then they invented whatever people use now. But I talk with them about the idea that they can find those things that they do better than other people. And first of all, that gives them a distinction in their career and builds their value to their employer or others, clients. But secondly, it gives them an opportunity to share that with others, and you get some notoriety from that, but also you get to explore and learn by sharing. So I really encourage people to learn things and then also step out there and share. Become sort of the person in the office, and then later on maybe the person in their local community, and then later on maybe somebody that's on a regional or national stage, talking on something or sharing, and then encourage the risk of doing that and trying, because I do share the failures, with people, and I think that for me it reinforces that those things that I'm learning, but also it deepens the friendship. What I like is when people start out, we start out as sort of professional mentors or whatever, and then we work towards more becoming friends. Friends in the sense that we help each other, we look out for one another, we can have honest criticism. I think it's great when you reach a point where the person that maybe you've been mentoring is able to feel comfortable telling Doug, hey, maybe you should do this instead, and I like that. I like that a lot. And I like what I do is also champion the successes of the people that I've mentored. I have several people who I've mentored who have vastly eclipsed my career. Okay, I mean, they're fairly well known. They're CEOs of companies or past CEOs. And I'm thinking, at the time when we were working on things, I was like happy that they enjoyed doing door schedules, or one person spent 2.5 years doing RFIs for a large project, and she managed that RFI process much better than I ever would have, and did it with a sort of pleasantness that nobody wants to go to an RFI meeting, but they'll go to one if it's pleasant, and so the idea is that you give them the foundation to then springboard from. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's been so great talking to you, not just in this conversation, but we've had so many great conversations over the years. And, I think if I were to sum it up, I would describe it as I care, so I do. That's what I see in you, Doug, is that you just spent a whole lifetime caring about things that matter to people and giving yourself the agency to do something about it, and just being willing to do something about it, whether that is learning or teaching or storytelling, unlocks the doors, and that starts to bring the opportunities. And again, not making it about yourself, but making it about the things you care about makes you fearless in taking those opportunities and trying, and not seeing failure as a setback, but rather a learning opportunity. And I really appreciate you sharing all these insights and these stories, because it's easy to look at somebody who's had a successful career and only see the wins. But it isn't just about the wins, it's about the mindset and how you frame every day as things go on.
That's right. That's right. It's a continuity, and it continues. I mean, I'm mentoring people. What's great about PMA, where I work at now, is they have a very structured and very supported mentorship program. And I have several people who have one I've had the pleasure of mentoring for 3 or 4 years now, another one about a year in. And it's really very much the amount of energy they put in, because I can guide energy and interest and enthusiasm. It's hard for me to conjure that out of people. And so I'm enjoying watching these individuals move up in their career, or move forward, I should say. Because in one case, her career is heading in directions I don't think she ever would have imagined where they would go. So, it's a blast, and it really transcends. And particularly when you're later in your career, it transcends, because I'm working on projects now where I know that they're going to go on beyond where I'm at. So I'm looking at the people that are involved and how to move them up the ladder, and not just the corporate ladder, but in terms of the learning ladder. So yeah, this is great. Angela, this is such a pleasure to be able to chat with you on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that more people get to hear your story and be inspired by it. Now, if they would like to connect with you, what is the best way to do that?
Probably, I'm going to give it an email. It's pretty simple. It's Doug, Doug, King, King. One is in the number one, my baseball uniform, at live.com. And it's funny because it was my original throwaway email when I lived in Dubai years ago. and because I was getting a lot of junk emails, and it is the one now that I use. It has like 120,000 emails in it. So it's dougking1@live.com. Happy to, and I'm on LinkedIn, and actually my the ability to reach me on LinkedIn. I'm a religious, or I'm a somebody who uses LinkedIn a lot. I abide by it. So
Yeah,
yeah, I really,
it is a great professional networking, not only to see what people you know are up to, but I'll see somebody post about research or something like that, and I'm like, oh, I had no idea this resource existed. And it people don't leverage it enough for sure.
I would agree. In fact, that could be a whole separate topic. It is, I've discovered it has value in it way beyond just the, I have a lot of connections, blah, blah, blah. I've been able to learn things, and like you say, understand, what's going on in the industry much in a concentrated way, and also understand where people are moving to. I hate to make baseball analogies for this whole thing, but collecting baseball cards and being on LinkedIn, there's some kinship there. And the ability of knowing where people are, and some of that is highly valuable, particularly in the strategic side. I mean, you understand who's where and that kind of thing. So yeah, that could be the whole separate topic for another time.
Well, it can be an online class we do. How to use
I
LinkedIn.
would love that. Oh my God, because most online classes on LinkedIn are very much mechanical, like put this in your biography or whatever, and they're great ideas. In fact, I've probably used most of them. But the idea of how to use it to learn and better, better what we're doing is that'd be a great
Yeah. Well, stay
presentation.
tuned. We'll have to make that happen.
I
But thank
will.
you again for being a guest and for sharing so many valuable insights on your career and the thought mechanisms that go into going from good to great and finding those opportunities and really making a difference.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to reflect on this, particularly, just recognizing the where I'm at, career-wise and everything, that, there's a lot of value, a lot of lessons that could be conveyed. But thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.